Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's Rich Perez welcoming you back into the rundown. Got a special guest in with me today, former Division I All-American for Hofstra University, current member of the coaching staff at Chaminade High School, and coach over for the Savage Wrestling Club, Justin Accordino.
Thanks for having me.
How's it going, man?
Yeah, not too bad, but with everything going on, it could be a little bit better, right?
Yeah.
But just like everything else, tough times, you got to kind of work through them and figure out ways to improve as a person and as a coach, things like that. So, not too bad. Working our way through it.
Steph. I wanted to start this off with like a quick story because for those of people who don't know me, I'm actually a really big fan of yours back in your wrestling days. So I had always been, in the wrestling since a kid with my dad, the big wrestling fan he is and everything. But it was always kind of something that I just did up until like my sophomore year of high school. And then I kind of turned into what they would call a mat rat. Started like going on like YouTube and Flow Wrestling, watching all of these different videos. At that time, Flow was still growing. They didn't really have any live events going on, just like whatever Martin and Joe Williamson and Believe Bader was just starting out with them at the time, whatever they were going to. So I'm in like the library of my high school going through Flow, and I think they had, it was like a throw of the week or whatever. It's Lou Rizzarello versus Reese Humphrey. So I check it out. And I'm like, the dual meet between Hofstra and Ohio State comes up. I didn't get to go to this one. I usually would be at those, being from Long Island growing up. We grew up watching Hofstra wrestling in the Tom Ryan days, Eric Schmeezing, John Massa, Noel Thompson, Tom Noto, all those guys, whatever. So I'm watching the dual meet now, and I get to 141, and it's at the time the defending national champ Jay Jaggers against this kid from Pennsylvania, Justin Accordino, who I had never heard of before. Off the bat, you hit this guy with a cement mixer, and I was like instantly a fan after that. Like, this dude is just exciting to watch. So like this is a really big deal for me. I just wanted to get that out there.
Yeah, man, that was a very exciting match to say the least. I remember that match very, very vividly. I remember going out. Me and Louis were really good friends. He was my training partner most of the time at practice, and one of the best training partners I had, matter of fact. And going into that match, I was really looking forward to wrestle Jaggers. He wasn't having the best season, but he was a national champ the year following. And I'm like, all right, I get to take a little jab at this guy and see what he's all about. And my coaches are like, all you have to do is not get majored and we could win this match. Had Louis not got thrown on his head. And I'm like, screw that. I'm going to win this match. I don't know what you guys are talking about, but I'm not about that stuff. Don't get majored nonsense. So I'm like, I'm going out there and I'm giving this kid everything I got, and it was a good match, real good match.
Yeah, that's just the approach and everything is what kind of gravitated me to want to watch you more. But let's take it from the beginning. Like, I usually would say, how did you get your start in wrestling? But talking to your dad back in the day on the forums, I learned that he used to be a coach back in the day. So I'm gonna assume that he introduced you to the sport. Was it like something that like you quickly gravitated to, or was it like you were kind of just doing it and then eventually became something that you really liked?
So yeah, my dad wrestled in high school. He was pretty good. He actually got inducted to the Pennsylvania Hall of Fame a few years ago, about 5 years ago. He was coaching when out of college. He was coaching, and he had me his freshman year of college, so he had to drop out of Lock Haven, and he got into coaching high school and youth wrestling after that. And it was just something that I was always around. He would bring me to my practices, bring me to his practices and stuff like that. And I was kind of the little kid that just gravitated towards the mat and towards the older kids. I know a lot of his older wrestlers would say that I was an annoyance. I used to like jump on their backs and choke them out and stuff like that. I was a little punk. But it was something that I just loved, and I think growing up, I had a pretty rough childhood. My dad experienced some drug problems, and my parents went through a divorce. Um, and one of the outlets for me was wrestling. You know, I took out all my frustration and sadness and anger on other kids on the mat. So that was something that I really enjoyed, and it was basically legal punishment. So I really loved wrestling.
So would you say that like wrestling has kind of been like a tool for you, like from obviously you talk about dealing with the things at a young age, like a tool for you to not only just be an escape, but something that's kind of, helped you through life?
Yeah, absolutely. It's for me, it was a coping mechanism, and I think it taught me so many great values that you bring on through the rest of your life. I no longer wrestle now, but just the consistency that it takes to be a good wrestler carries over into your job. You wake up in the morning and you're not feeling too well or whatever, and it's real easy to call out of work. But with my background, it's never really a thought in my mind to call out of work. So I could still get through this day or whatever. So I think that's something that that my work and all my employees and the staff really cherish about me, is just that work ethic that wrestling gave me.
Right on, right on. So like, when did you really start to see the success in the wrestling? Was it something that like quickly came with you, or did it come over time?
Um, I was pretty successful right away in the youth wrestling. Um, there was definitely ups and downs, uh, times where I felt like I was staying stagnant and stuff like that. But I won Mawa Nationals like 8 times when I was a kid, to the point where my dad just pulled me out of it. He's like, "We're not going to do that anymore." um, but I don't know. There's always ups and downs. I've lost to girls. I've lost to kids that weren't too good. Things like that. So it was just trying to stay the track and continue to do what I loved.
Right, right. I mentioned that style that you liked, that you wrestled back when you were competing. Like what like how did that come about? Like the cement mixer always kind of seemed like a thing that like a lot of you guys from Pennsylvania did. So was that like something you learned off the bat? And like how did like what was it about that style that like made you want to compete that way?
Um, yeah, so I'd like to say like my style is very unorthodox. There's things that I trained from a really young age, and most of it was like fundamental wrestling, just good positional wrestling and stuff like that. The cement mixer came when I was in 8th grade. I was actually still a cadet, but I got asked to wrestle Junior 98 at the Junior National Duels as an 8th grader. And on that team, we had unbelievable lineup. And one of the kids on the team was Jeff Ekloff, who was an All-American for Oklahoma as a true freshman. And then he wrestled at Pitt after that. And one of his specialties was the cement mixer. And I remember at that tournament, one of our first losses was to Michigan. Or no, my first loss was to Michigan. I lost to Paul Donahoe. And prior to that, in the morning, Jeff Ekloff pulled me aside and he was like, "Hey, I want to show you this move." And he showed me the cement mixer. And I wrestled Donahoe, who was the #1 kid in the country at the time, as a senior, and I was an 8th grader. And I cement mixed him right to his back. And ever since then, that was like one of my go-to moves. I practiced every day. So.
Naming some big names right there, man, taking me back as a fan.
Oh yeah.
So I guess once you got to you were pretty accomplished in high school, and once you got to college, I want to confirm this with you because this is like stuff that I heard, but like I never actually like got it like confirmed. So you were recruited by Iowa and Penn State?
No, I was never recruited by Iowa. I was recruited by Penn State. I actually verbally committed to Penn State. And then like the following week, they recruited Frank Molinaro. Me and Frank wrestled twice in high school. In the same tournament, matter of fact, we wrestled at the Delaware Duels, and he beat me the first round of the Duels. I think I lost to him by like a point or two, and then we wrestled them again in the finals, and I beat him in, I believe, overtime. So me and Frank knew each other pretty well. Um, John Hughes was the assistant coach at Penn State at the time, and I was training with Russ Hughes, his brother, at BTWC, Benton Wrestling Club. Um, and when they recruited him, my dad was basically like, "No, you're not going to Penn State anymore." And I went against my verbal, which I really didn't want to, but my dad did a lot for me growing up for wrestling and stuff like that. And we had a good connection with some of the wrestlers at Hofstra, Joe Ravelli and Charlie Griffin. So I decided to withdraw my verbal and go to Hofstra at that point.
And at this,
I was recruited.
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was recruited by a bunch of bigger schools as well, but you know, I was looking at Pittsburgh, Penn State, Hofstra, obviously, a lot of those bigger schools. But
so you said you went. I didn't even know that you were. I knew that you were recruited by Penn State. I didn't know that you actually ever committed to them. And obviously, people here at Penn State, they think Cale at this time. You know, you said Hughes was an assistant. Troy Sunderland was the head coach at the time, correct?
Yeah.
They were pretty, you know, they weren't what they are now, but they were pretty good back then too. I think 2008 they finished top 5 in the country, if I'm correct.
They may have. I can't remember off the top of my head. I know 2007 we beat Penn State at home at Hofstra.
Yeah, I wanted to get into that too. Well,
yeah.
So the Hofstra career is definitely.
Yeah. They were good, but they were definitely not what they are at the time. Nowhere near. You know, they always had those studs from Pennsylvania and Jersey and throughout the country, but I don't think they had the depth or just those top blue chip guys at the time.
Right. So I know Tom Shiflett was the head coach at the time, but Dubuque was probably in his second or third year on the coaching staff. What was it? I know you talked about Charlie Griffin and those guys being over there, and that was a connection. But what else was it about Hofstra that made you want to say that I'm going to go here?
Yeah, so Charlie Griffin was from Reading, Pennsylvania, which is where I grew up as a kid. My dad ran his youth, middle school, and high school club down there. It was called the Road Warriors. So I knew Charlie for a long time. And then Joe Ravelli was basically like family to my stepmother in Wilkes-Barre. So we were very close with them. But the main draw for me at the time was Joe Dubuque, you know, coming out of college, 2-time national champ from Indiana. I just loved his style and his personality, and he was one of the guys that I was always on the phone with. So he was basically the main reason why I figured that I would go to Hofstra at the time.
So when you get there, what was that experience like? You're coming in 141. Your freshman year overlapped with Charlie's senior year, right?
Yeah. So my freshman year, you know, with my personality in wrestling, you know, Charlie had at the time he had an All-American by the time that I was decided that I was going to Hofstra. So I was told right out of the gate that they were going to redshirt Charlie, and I was going to start as a freshman. And then he went out and took third at the national tournament that year, and they're like, "All right, scratch that. You guys are going to wrestle off, and we'll see how that works out." So I wrestled off with Charlie, and I actually lost to Charlie by riding time. So we had an awesome match. So I ended up losing by a point to him. And we were battling it out really hard in the room every day. You know, he has a little bit different style than me, but we had some really good goes between me, him, and Charlie Griffin and Dave Thomasette and stuff like that. But my freshman year was tough on me. You know, I was coming out of high school wrestling 145, weighing about 165 in the off season. I was cutting down to 141, and I think it would have been easier had I been in the starting lineup because I would have been making weight every week or so. But redshirt and you're wrestling in these tournaments unattached, and they're like every other week, every 3 weeks, and stuff like that. So my weight was really fluctuating, and I just at that time I was very immature. I didn't understand like how to cut weight, dieting, and stuff like that. I was basically killing myself by by not really eating and cutting water weight and stuff like that at the time. So it was a pretty rough year for me. I didn't feel like I got much better technically until I a few years later when I went up to 149.
Yeah, I could definitely relate to that too myself during my wrestling days. I remember cutting down to 57, weighing about like a buck 75 every week during my red shirt year. So I know what you're saying there. It's not fun at all. What were some of the things that kind of helped you out going into that next year when it was pretty known that you were going to be that guy at 141?
Yeah, that was a really tough year making weight as well at 41, but I was able to make weight more frequently being in the starting lineup. I think my expectations were a lot higher at the time. I thought I was going to do a lot better, but it was actually one of my better years as far as my record goes. I was healthy. I was struggling with my weight a little bit, but I was still very committed to my dieting. My coaches were also really helpful to me. I can't tell you the number of times that Dubuque kept me after practice to hop on the treadmill or get an extra drill in the morning or do morning workouts and stuff like that. I actually lived with Coach Onspach for like a month, so that he could really watch my diet, which was really helpful at the time. But it was a team effort, to say the least. Everyone was helpful. My teammates were there for me. My coaches were there for me. My parents were there for me. I think it takes a lot of people in order to be successful.
Yeah, and in that year too, I think not only yourself, but like you guys as a team were really like making some noise that year. I'm pretty sure you guys beat Penn State that season. You majored Frank Molinaro in that dual meet.
Yeah, I majored Frank in that dual meet. We beat Penn State. A lot of our guys had some really big wins. We were just meshing really well as a team. We're always looking out for each other, making sure that we got our workouts in and stuff like that. So just each and every one of us were stepping up to be a leader, actually.
What were the expectations for everybody that season? I know like Ryan Pachovich had like close matches with some top tier guys that season. Obviously Lou had pretty much been a known commodity at one point, not that season, but at one point in his career was ranked number 1 in the country. You had been making some noise. Steve Bonanno was doing very good as a true freshman. Like what was the expectations for you guys coming into that postseason?
Honestly, I thought we could have been like a top 10 team for sure that year. I was looking at myself, Louis, Bonanno, Pachovich. There's a few other guys too that I really thought could have been All-Americans if they put together a good national tournament. There was a couple guys that kind of just fell short. But there are also some really tough weight classes. Those weight classes were stacked that year. I know my weight class that year in particular was very, very deep, so basically once we got to the national tournament, just making sure that we were all focused and mainly focusing on ourselves at the time, making sure our weight was down, getting good workouts in the morning before our matches, staying focused with our competition. And then as soon as our matches ended, getting back to the hotel and relaxing a little bit and getting ready for that next round. And that's something that I think is really important at the national tournament that not a lot of people see, is just the routine of some of the wrestlers and what they're doing. Nowhere close to things that you see in high school where you're wrestling and you're hanging out watching everybody wrestle and stuff like that. So I had very high expectations. Our coaches had very high expectations. And although I think we fell a little bit short of those expectations, I was really proud with the way that the team wrestled and the individuals.
Right. So that next season, after a season where you guys had a couple highs, that next season was a little lower, the 2010 season. I know Bonanno had got hurt early in this with a season-ending injury. I believe you had a season-ending injury that year as well. I'm not sure if Pachovich had a season-ending injury or he just took a red shirt. I know Louis took a red shirt. Pretty much like I think the only like bright spot on that team was probably Johnny Bonilla Bowman.
Yeah, and Ben Clymer, I believe, was still in the lineup at the time. Yeah.
Um, what
Um,
what was going through like your head through all of this? Dubuque had left as well, right?
yeah, yeah. Um, Man, it's hard to even get into the Dubuque stuff. I had such a good relationship with him. Um, I'll be honest. I broke down. I was crying. I couldn't believe that they were getting rid of Joe at the time. Um, I had the transfer thought on my head right away. But it was something that I just wanted to stay by my teammates through a hard time and stuff like that. Um, that year was difficult, really, really difficult year for myself, tearing my ACL for the first time. And back then, like you heard like a torn ACL, like to me, it was like you're done wrestling completely. I thought, it seems like it's a lot different now. People are wrestling without their ACLs or getting surgeries where they're back pretty quickly. Um, but that was really hard. Redshirting Lou, me out with the season-ending injury. Ryan also had the same. He tore his ACL, I believe, that year as well, so he was out that year. Um, so that was a really hard year. I think it was even harder on the coaches because being a small school, we just really didn't have that depth. So you lose those guys, and you're basically throwing in walk-ins at all those weights. We went from, I think, winning 11 straight CAA championships or something like that year to losing to damn near everybody in the conference. So it was tough.
Well, you guys came back on a roll right after that. Guys coming out of red shirt, coming back from injury. In the first dual meet, I remember seeing that following season, you were going up against Torsten Gillespie. And he was a pretty big deal at that time too. Like, kind of talk to me about like, what was the team's mindset after the year that you guys had previously, coming back knowing you're getting everybody back?
Um, I think we picked up right where we left off. From that following year when I was at 41 and we were beating teams like Penn State and stuff like that. So I think we did a really good job of brushing off all that negativity from the prior year and getting right back to the wrestling. Everyone focused on getting their injuries healthy and stuff like that. So we all felt pretty confident in ourselves as far as injuries go, and we were preparing like it was no other year. So I think we just were looking at it like the same year, like that, basically just imagining that year never happened and we were right back in the same groove again.
And I know you ended up having another season-ending injury that season as well, but like even though it was like a down for you, like being able to see a guy like Lou, who had been in around the 12 so many years, finally break through, and seeing PJ Gillespie get on the podium as well, was that like a little bit of satisfaction for you that season?
Yeah, of course. Louie and PJ, I was really close with them. Probably closer than most of my teammates, especially Lou and PJ as well, because we were kind of around the same weight class in high school and stuff like that. So we were very close to each other. So I remember I was in the stands, obviously, for that. I wasn't able to wrestle because I tore my ACL again. But that was definitely very gratifying just to know that all their hard work and dedication into the sport was finally shown through.
Yeah, and coming into that following season when you got a returning All-American as well as guys that are like some hammers, it's you still got those expectations ready to roll. So that 2012 season, I remember going to watch you guys at the Wrestle-Offs, and I just remember seeing you walk out at 157, and I didn't know that you were going up a weight class. I was like, what's going on here? I don't think he's a 57 pounder. The knee injuries were kind of a thought going into that decision, or what?
Yeah, so it was basically two years back to back where I was trying to rehab my knee back to normal, and I felt that cutting weight and stuff like that was a big part of why I kept injuring my knee, cutting to 41 those 2 years, and my thought process going into the beginning of the season was to focus on being healthy, get my knee back to normal, and hopefully by December or so, I was going to be planning to go back down to 41. So I wasn't too worried about that particular time or the beginning of the season. My mind was really set on nationals. You know, what is my best chance to be healthy in March so that I could be an All-American? And that was one of the decisions to wrestle off at 57, just to kind of get a match in. So wasn't too worried about getting my weight down until our first dual meet.
Yeah, so I mean that season in particular was an interesting one for you guys too. It was Rob Onspach's first year as the head coach. Shiflett had decided to move on. He brings Dan Valamon onto the staff and Gregor Gillespie onto the staff as well. Like, it's kind of a recurrent theme here, but like, just like for you guys, like, what's it like? It's like, you know, you're going through this coaching change sort of, but like, it's like fresh blood. Like, what was that doing for you guys' careers? Like, Gregor was really known for tilts. I think that's the first. Like, Stevie was pretty, you know, well versed with his tilts. I think I started seeing you kind of throw that into your game as well. Like, what was it like having these guys on the staff for you guys?
I think that's important for college programs, just to have fresh blood in there. I know, like, when Dubuque came in, he was still very into the wrestling and competing and stuff like that. So it was basically like throwing this like beast of a kid from a college program into your program, and he didn't like to lose any more than we like to lose, you know. So when we had Gregor Gillespie, Valmont, Zach Tonelli hop into the program, it was the same thing. It was almost like they're our coaches, but they're competitors at the same time. So our goal going into practice was to get better, but also to try to beat those guys, because if we could beat them, we could beat anyone in the country. So it was a huge benefit to have them in the room, as well as just pick the minds of people like that. And all of them were very well versed in different things. So we could go to any of those coaches to get better at any different position.
You know, I think you guys really started to roll like towards the end of that season as well. So, you know, going into nationals, I personally, and I'm a young fan at the time, so, you know, I'm a little more optimistic about like teams that I'm a fan of at this particular time than anything else. I looked at that and kind of said, you know, think PJ could probably get back on the podium again. Justin's got a good shot. Steve's got a good shot. Like, thought even Luke Veit could get in there as well. Ben Clymer was having a really good season that year. But you in particular, I remember when the brackets came out, you know, we were looking, and I think your bracket actually, it was set, and then like somebody like had scratched out of the tournament or something like that, so it got touched up just a little bit. But I think I remember going to look at the brackets, looking at your path with my dad, and we're just sitting there looking at, knowing how good you were in the year that you were having, saying, you know, I think he could get on the podium, definitely make the quarters, and then looking at it again, and like he could make the semis. Like, was that something you were looking into, or was it just like, I'm here to do my thing? Whoever's in my path is in my path, and you know, we're gonna try and make it happen.
Yeah, the bracket did get switched up a little bit. We kind of were going in there with a game plan, one match at a time. Can't really like predict who's gonna win or lose, whether it's the first round, quarters, semis. So it's very difficult after that first match to kind of game plan. So once I saw that I was wrestling Ivan Lubachinski, I had a good understanding that he was kind of an upper body guy, and I was very well versed in Greco-Roman. I'm comfortable in those throws in those positions. So I was looking at that as a very winnable match. So I just had to go out there and wrestle and compete my best. And then I did have an eye on Donnie Vincent, because I had a very difficult time wrestling with him in college. We had a very similar style. He kind of came at you all at once, like a fireball. So he was difficult to wrestle, and I would have had him in the quarters, but he was wrestling Justin Lester first round, and he definitely gave him a lot of issues with the leg routing and stuff like that. And I remember stepping off the mat after beating Lubachinski, and Gillespie goes, you have Lester. And I was like, oh man, here we go. This ball's rolling now, you know. So when I saw that, I was like, all right, I'm in a really good place now to All-American. So that was definitely an upset in the bracket. That not saying that I couldn't have beaten Lester, because I think any given day I could have. But matchup wise, I felt like Lester was much better matchup for me.
So, like, you know, you're an All-American. You know, after all the injuries and everything, you finally get through in the podium. Like, what's that like? Is it satisfying? It's like emotional for you, because like mentioning like all the heartaches and everything, and like stuff that you can't control, stopping you from competing, and you finally getting this. Like, what was it like to finally break through and make that podium?
Um, it was very emotional and very satisfying. I think my interview after the round to All American, you know, I was crying and stuff as soon as I walked off the mat. Um, my goal was always to be a national champ. You know, as a little kid, I wanted to be in the Olympics and stuff like that. You know, and there's a very small percentage of people that get that opportunity. Um, but that was always the goal. Um, but after all my injuries and stuff, it was very important to me to continue to wrestle and to follow through with some of my goals. And I was extremely happy that I was able to accomplish that. And now that I could say call myself an All-American, so that was awesome. I'm very grateful for that.
Well, we're not going into the semis of that tournament. You know, you're going up against Frank Molinaro, number one seed, returning national finalist. But like we mentioned earlier in the interview, you had beaten him before in college convincingly. You know, what was it like in your head? Like that, you know, you're having a great tournament already. It's NCAA's, anything could happen. Like, did you feel like you could knock him off? Like, what was like the approach going into that match? You got national champ Gregor Gillespie in your corner. Like, how was all of that?
Um, Absolutely. You know, I think stepping out on the mat, uh, even since a little kid all the way through college, there was no one that I stepped on that line against that I didn't think that I could beat. Um, I've wrestled Frank many times, so I was going into that match very focused, with the mindset that I was going to be in the national championship. Um, Unfortunately, it didn't work out that way, but I thought I wrestled really well the whole tournament. Um, Even after that loss, you know, my matches in the wrestlebacks were really close matches. So I was really pleased with the way that I wrestled at the tournament that year.
Well, you know, you're coming into this season, this following season, you know, as a returning All-American, you and Banano. So the expectations as a team are pretty high, considering like the recruiting class you're bringing in is pretty good on top of the guys that you got returning. It's on Spock's second year. Unfortunately for you, you tear your ACL again. So like, what's going through your head now? It's like, this is clearly the end, or like were you like, did you think about like wrestling on without the ACL that season, or
Um, yeah, so I actually tore my ACL training for the All-Star Classic. At the time, they were giving me a couple different names to wrestle. I was either going to wrestle Oliver or Ness at the All-Star Classic. So I was actually training with Luke Vase and Tonelli, and we were just playing around with some positions. And Luke was having a really hard time finishing a single leg on me during our live go. So at the end of practice, I was helping him out a little bit, and he had my right leg up in the air, and I was hopping around on my left leg, which is the knee that I tore a few times. And he went to trip me, and I kind of came down on my foot weird and popped again. And you know, he was like, "Are you all right?" And I was like, "I tore my ACL again." And he started crying. He started crying. He was like, "No, you didn't. You all right? Stop messing with me." I was like, "Yeah, dude, I did. I know I did." And as soon as that happened, I walked into my coach's office and I said, "Tell Andy to call the trainers right now, and I want to get surgery as soon as possible." Because I wanted to see if I could get the surgery and be able to come back in time for the season. And they called the surgeon, and they said that's just not going to be possible. You're not going to be able to get the surgery and come back in time to wrestle. So I'm like, all right. Started icing it, started going to physical therapy, started to do weight training, lifting, and stuff like that to try to build up the muscles around my knee so that it was as stable as possible. And I took quite a while doing that, and I'm like, I'm going to give this a shot with no ACL. So I was practicing with some of the walk-ons and stuff like that, just to kind of, get my technique back to where it was after the time off, after tearing my ACL, and also just start to feel a little bit more comfortable and get some confidence in it. And then I started wrestling with some of the varsity guys, Zach Tonelli, with the coaching staff, and it was bothering me a lot. Almost every single position that I was in, my knee was shifting, and after practice, it was swelling up really bad. And I never complained about it at all, never took time off at practice, maybe winced here and there and then went right back out on the mat and started wrestling. But my coaches definitely saw that I was struggling. And then the one morning, the coaches called me in and basically were like, hey, I don't think you should give this a try. They were like, we love you. We know that you really want this and stuff like that. But I think it's best that, this is the end. This is the end of the road. And in a way, I was grateful for that, because I knew it, but I just didn't want to do it. I didn't want to go out that way. But I think if I had an All-American the year before that, I would have been wrestling. If I, no matter what, my leg could have been shattered, I would have been out in the mat wrestling. So that was basically one of the main reasons that made it a little easier for me.
So you ended up becoming an All-American, but dealing with all these injuries, what do you feel like that's done for you? Since what's the impact that's had on your life since then? Not taking things for granted or anything like that?
Just trying to tough through, man. There's never going to be a time in your life that things aren't going to get a little tough. So, just trying to tough through it and be the best person that you could be, regardless of the roadblocks that are in the way.
Yeah. So I just want to get into your time out here now. You must really like Long Island and to not go back to PA after college. What went into that decision?
I do like Long Island. I really enjoy it out here, but I definitely miss my family a lot. Making the trek back to Pennsylvania has definitely always been a thought for me. I was fortunate enough to find a teaching position at Chaminade, fresh out of college after I got done with my master's, and started up my wrestling club. So at this point in my life, in order to find a new job, start the wrestling program, move my family with my son and my girlfriend back to Pennsylvania would be very difficult, and I would have to have an amazing job and opportunity to be able to do that. So I'm very content with what I have here at this time.
So what went into the decision to start the Savage Wrestling Club? That name.
I guess just like my lifestyle and my style of wrestling, just going in there and letting it fly, So I want all my kids to step on the mat and just be an absolute savage. Anything that they could do to win, So that was the reason why I chose that name.
How did you guys end up you do this with PJ Gillespie, right?
Yeah, PJ is one of my assistants. He kind of floats in and out, as well as Justin Vines, Elijah Rodriguez helps me out, Miguel helps me out. So I have a lot of people from the area that are helping out with the club. But as far as running the practices every day, it's mostly me.
How's it been with everything going on. Like I know a couple people, like when this out here in New York, we're in phase 4 now, so things are a little more lax than other parts of the country. But like when it first like hit, like how was that? Like were you still trying to find ways to get guys doing stuff, or like you were just like, I'll see you when things start to calm down? Like what was going on for you at that time?
Yeah, it was never like, I'll see you guys in a few months when all this stuff calms down. I always try to find a way to get my athletes better, as well as I guess get better as a coach, as well. Grow as a coach, grow as a team. So right off the bat, I was doing virtual classes. So we were doing stance motion, strength conditioning, tumbling, gymnastics drills, functional stretching, and stuff like that. And I had anywhere from 30 to 40 kids on 3 days a week. Once we got clearance to work out outside, I started doing outdoor practices. The last 2 months, I had about 50 kids in at Cedar Creek Park in Seaford. So doing the same things out there, social distancing, but stance motion, inside step, outside step, level change, down blocks, sprawling, hill workouts. The kids ran between 1.5 to 3 miles every day. We did a bunch of strength and conditioning stuff with resistance bands as well. So we did a lot to maintain all of our wrestlers and keep them in the program, as well as get them better in their stance and all the fundamental aspects of wrestling.
Right on, right on. I guess before we get out of here, I gotta ask you, like, being your style, I know you still watch a lot of college wrestling and everything. Like, who are some of the guys that you're looking at right now and like you're really a fan of?
Well, Jordan Oliver, I've always been a big fan of his. He's coming out of District 11, which was my regional. Jordan was a little younger than me. I actually wrestled with his brother Josh a little bit more than him, but Jordan and I were on a lot of teams together. So I really love his style, his stance and motion, his speed and stuff like that. Internationally, I like Sidakov, Frank Camizo. Obviously a big fan of Dake. His style just doesn't really mess with my style, but you have to love just his determination and his always finding a way to win and stuff like that. So I watch a lot of wrestling. I watch older wrestling. I watch any of the senior level stuff, college wrestling. So there's a lot of guys. There's not many that I can't really pick a top 5, right? Roman Bravo Young is electrifying to watch. So there's a lot of people that I really enjoy, and I kind of pick up their techniques, play around with them, and then try to teach them to some of my wrestlers as well.
Definitely. Well, Justin, I want to thank you for coming on with me, man. This was a real pleasure. Was really looking forward to this. I hope everything works out with you with your club and everything. And hopefully we can get some other guys over there to help you out as well.
Sounds good, Rich. I really appreciate it. It was nice talking with you tonight.
Thank you, man. So it was Justin, it's Rich. I want to thank you guys for tuning in, and we will catch you next time. This was The Rundown.